So this past week, I was able to go to my first ever film festival. And that film festival was the SLO Film Festival, SLO being San Luis Obispo, which is my hometown. It's where I grew up, and it was a really cool opportunity to go to a festival I've always wanted to go to. This festival, I'd always hear about it while it was happening, and being like a film fan in the area, I obviously wanted to go, but usually by the time I heard about it, it had already started. Passes were hard to get, so I had never actually attended, which surprised a lot of my friends because movies are the only thing I know how to talk about. So how I was able to go was a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go to the SLO Film Fest, and I said, yeah, I've always wanted to, but I never planned for it or anything. And this friend is a fan of the videos I make, and without asking me, he just sent the people at the SLO Film Festival my videos and asked them if they wanted me to go to review the movies, and they said yes. They were chill. They gave me a pass. Thanks to Bill, who reached out to them, and thank you to the SLO Film Festival for having me. And so I went to the festival. I had a great time, saw a lot of movies, less movies than I planned on seeing. I thought I was going to be able to maintain a schedule of seeing 3 movies a day for 5 days in a row, and I found that is hell, and I don't think any sane person can sit through that many movies, no matter how good the movies are. You kind of just end up feeling like shit. So didn't see all the movies I was intending to see, but still saw a lot of great movies, and here's what I thought about them. First, I saw the documentary Join or Die, and I think it's one of the best documentaries I've seen in quite a while. Going to a film festival, one thing I didn't realize was the hardest part is just choosing between all the movies that there are to see. I obviously wasn't able to see everything, so I had to kind of rank out which ones I wanted to see most, and then build out a schedule based on the ones I wanted to see most and filling other movies around them into the schedule. And I will say this documentary was probably one of the last movies to make the list. I thought the premise was intriguing, a documentary about clubs and the impact of clubs sounded cool to me, but there was a lot of other interesting stuff that I thought sounded cooler, to be honest. But this movie really surprised me. I thought it was really well made. It had a really great pace. The editing was all very solid. I think one of my favorite things were the animations. I thought there was a lot of really cool, unique looking animations that kept the movie very interesting to look at, which is very important for documentaries. I think I saw a lot of documentaries, so I'm going to be talking about a lot of documentaries, and the biggest challenge with a documentary is how to make what can be essentially a collection of interviews, how to make that into a visual story that is entertaining for the audience. In terms of what the movie's saying, the centerpiece of the movie is the work of Robert Putnam, the political scientist, and I thought this aspect of the movie was handled very well. His interviews were all great, and the telling of basically the story of his life through his work was all handled really well. You could tell that the filmmaker had a really good relationship with Putnam. And it's interesting that it is a movie about clubs, because how Putnam started first researching clubs was in his attempt to figure out what makes democracies flourish. He was studying democracies and governments and comparing data sets, trying to figure out how to make a government flourish. And one of the biggest correlations, one of the only really solid correlations between the success of a government or something that can be connected to the success of a government, was the amount of clubs and how involved people were in their clubs and organizations. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of all the things that this movie really gets into. Great movie. I think it's very actionable. It's the call to action at the end of the movie is handled really, really well. And yeah, overall, fantastic. I give this one a 9 out of 10. Next, I watched the film Tuesday, and going into this one, all I really knew about it was I read the synopsis, and what I knew was it was about death and a talking bird, and it had Julia Louis-Dreyfus in it, which all those facts intrigued me. However, this might be the biggest letdown of the film festival. I just really wasn't connecting to this one, and I could see it being a film that really speaks to a certain audience. I just kind of found myself getting distracted from the story and it not really holding my attention very well. However, it wasn't all bad. I think a lot of the visual choices were interesting. I think the performances were really, really solid. I just think that the overall vision didn't really speak to me. I'll give that one a 5 out of 10. Next, I watched the film Humanist. It's a long title. Next, I watched the film Humanist, Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person. And with that film title, I kind of just knew I needed to watch this movie because it's not often that a title so perfectly encompasses what a movie's gonna be about. I mean, I think obviously you want a shorter title, ideally, to be a little bit more succinct, but from the title and from the premise, I knew this was gonna be something that was very unique, something I had never seen before, and it really was. I thought the biggest surprise about the film, for me, because I knew nothing about it, was the comedy. I think it was one of the best examples of a mixture between horror and comedy that I've seen in quite a while. I think a lot of like the comedy, it felt inspired by the work of Wes Anderson. It felt inspired by Wes Anderson and also Edgar Wright. I think the amount of great filmmaking that enhanced the comedy and really elevated this movie, it was all great. I think it was handled really well. It made me very curious about this filmmaker to see what else I don't know if they've done anything else. Also, that noise, this plant just rubs on my window whenever it's windy, which is great for audience retention. So it looks like this French filmmaker who did Humanist Vampire had up to this point only done short films, so this was their first ever feature, which is very impressive because I thought it was so unique and so cool and so well done. One thing I will say, I saw this last on my first day of the festival, and that was back when I thought that I could, god damn it, I'm so bad at not touching the mic. I saw it on the first day of the festival, and that was when I thought seeing 3 movies in a day was a good idea every day, and I couldn't stop falling asleep in this movie, which I feel bad saying because I feel like that sounds like a slight on the film. It really isn't. Every time I would fall asleep, I'd wake up and be like, god damn it, what the fuck happened? And so I can't wait to watch this movie again. It was so unique. Acting was great. The overall visual style was great. There's a particular scene of 2 characters just listening to music. It kind of felt inspired by Before Sunset. Is that the first one? But it's a fantastic scene. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, just a very, very balanced movie with a lot of different things going for it that I would definitely recommend people check out. I'm going to give that one an 8 out of 10. And then starting my second day of the film festival, I watched the movie Mountain Boy. And this was a very interesting movie. I think the biggest compliment I can give to this movie and what it does so well, especially from the perspective of an American viewer, this movie felt like traveling to the United Arab Emirates and experiencing the beauty of that place, and the movie felt like an adventure. And the character goes on an adventure, but it really felt you really felt every location. I feel like it's a film about connection to nature, and I think that is what it did the best. It was very focused on the landscapes and the look of the film, and it was a really cool little story too. I think my critiques come down to the acting, which I don't feel super confident saying, because it's kind of hard judging acting in a foreign language movie, because you can't really tell how much like the dialect and the language plays into what you perceive as good or bad. But some of it to me felt slightly cheesy, and the story was definitely a little bit on the more cheesy and sentimental side, which isn't usually my jam. I feel like I'm more into intense, fucked up shit. But that being said, I really locked into this movie. I think if you give this movie what it needs to, what you need to enjoy it, if you kind of forgive the fact that it's going to be a little bit cheesy and a little bit slower paced, and you just kind of go along for the ride of it, it's a really, really cool experience, because you get to experience so many different beautiful landscapes and so many different aspects of this culture that are new. It just really, it was cool to like learn about this culture through the movie, and I think that's the thing I like most about it. I'm gonna give that one a 6 out of 10. Next, I watched the film Uproar, and there were two factors that went into me wanting to see this movie. The first is the fact that it is a movie that was made in New Zealand. I love New Zealand. My trip to New Zealand is one of the best trips I've ever been on. It's such a beautiful place with such lovely people, and ever since getting into the early work of Taika Waititi, who obviously went on to be a huge Hollywood director, his early stuff set in New Zealand really gave me an appreciation of this culture, and really made me want to see more stuff coming out of New Zealand. The second aspect also ties into Taika Waititi. The second thing that made me want to see this movie is the fact that it stars Julian Dennison, who you might have seen in Hunt for the Wilder People or Deadpool 2. I think he's maybe one of the most underrated comedic actors out there. Not just a comedic actor, but I think this movie shows off his ability to balance comedy and drama, because the comedy hits just as hard as his more dramatic and emotional scenes, and that balance is kind of why this movie is so great. I think well balanced is a really good way to put it. It's every character got their moment, every subplot was so well developed, and when you look at the amount of subplots, it's kind of overwhelming. There's a bunch happening in this movie, all centered around this one boy, and the fact that this movie is as cohesive as it is, and the way that all these subplots merge at the film's end, I think is just really, really smart and talented filmmaking. Speaking of, let's call out the director. Paul Middleditch and Hamish Bennett did a great job with this film. But yeah, similar to Mountain Boy, I felt like I always like it when I can get everything I normally like to get out of a movie, the entertainment, the storytelling, and I can also learn something, and I felt like I was learning more about the culture of the Maori people, and the culture of New Zealand at large in the 1980s, and how apartheid had affected that culture and affected the sport of rugby. There was just a lot to really like about this movie, and it was just such a well constructed story. So yeah, I would say I think this movie's probably gone under the radar for a lot of people. A lot of people haven't heard of it, but it is definitely worth your time, so check it out. I'd give it a 9 out of 10. Next, I watched the movie African Giants. There are a few movies out there that I kind of categorize in my mind in this subgenre, which isn't a genre or anything like related to the subject matter of the movies, but the reason I relate them together is it's movies that kind of reinforce this idea that I believe very strongly in, and that idea is the fact that all you need to make a good movie is good writing and effort, and budget doesn't have anything to do with whether or not a movie succeeds or fails. I think a movie like African Giants, a movie that it's clear it didn't have the biggest budget, you can tell by the limited locations, the limited cast. It's a very, very, very contained, simple movie. But it was an incredible experience to watch. It was the best movie I watched at the festival, easily. And it's just a testament to how there really isn't a barrier to make a movie. It's just effort. And Omar Kamara, who directed this movie, killed it. You can tell that the amount of creativity and thought and vision that went into this movie, it produced such a cool product, and one that I really encourage people to seek out. I think, like a lot of these films, this one can easily slip under the radar, but it is super, super, super worth your time. The story is about two brothers, one who is a aspiring actor in Los Angeles pursuing his dream, and the other is in law school in their hometown in the South, and they're first generation immigrants from Sierra Leone. And this movie does such a good job in portraying that perspective and what it's like to be an immigrant and balancing expectations of family and dreams and aspirations. And it really asks like what responsibility we have to each other. It's such a good movie about family and sibling relationships. And I mean, I already called out how good Omar Kamara's direction is, but the other two MVPs of this movie are the two leads. And the other two MVPs are the two leads of this movie. The way these two carry this film is so impressive. The whole movie's success is so dependent on them selling these characters and the emotions of these scenes, to the point where you feel the implications and the stakes baked into every action or line that they deliver. There are times when characters just pause while saying something, and that's like the most dramatic thing that happened in the entire movie, and that has you on the edge of your seat, just that one pause, because you know what's behind it. You know that there's so much emotion behind every action. It was just such a great movie. Definitely go check it out if you can. And yeah, best movie of the festival for me. 10 out of 10. I started the next day with the documentary Art and Life, the story of Jim Phillips. And this was a really cool documentary for me because I grew up on the central coast of California, and my dad works in the surf and skate industry. My brother was always a really talented skater, and so I was around that world, going to skate competitions, spending a lot of time in skate shops, at skate events. And I remember the first time I saw this image. There's this very iconic image of a hand with a mouth screaming on it, and that was the work of Jim Phillips, a very prolific artist who really shaped the look of skateboarding and skateboarding brands, and in particular Santa Cruz skateboards. And this documentary was so good. It was such a good account of this artist's life, their work, what that work meant to them, how it changed over the years. It was fascinating, and I love movies about art and artists, and I think this was one of the best I've seen about that in a while. Similarly to Join or Die, I really appreciated all the animation that happened. They had a lot of Jim Phillips static designs animated by animators to make them move on the screen, and it really added a lot to the film. And I will say, I think this movie's biggest strength is this steady pace it keeps, and I think that's also something to be said about Join or Die and all the other movies that I liked at this festival. Was there was so many movies that kept very intentional, steady paces, and it's so integral to a movie's success. But yeah, because of my connection to the subject matter and just because of the talent of the filmmaking, this was a fantastic movie, and I really, really enjoyed it. 8 out of 10. Next, I watched the documentary 1,000 Pines, and this was one of the most heartbreaking movies I had ever seen. Again, this movie is a real testament to the fact that good filmmaking doesn't have anything to do with budget. It's very clear that the gear used, the camera quality and the lighting quality, it's clear that it was a very low budget movie. However, the story being told and the importance of the story that's being told carried this movie and made it into one of the most impactful watches of the entire festival. The story is about forestry workers who work on temporary work visas, and it's about Mexican people who come into the United States to work as forestry workers, and all the ways that that industry is really taking advantage of these people. And I think it's a really eye-opening movie, and I think to go into details would kind of just water it down, but it really brought attention to this issue and really put you in the shoes of these people and what it meant to them to be away from their families as long as they were, and to do the work that they did, and how it really, really negatively affected so many lives. Really, really well-made movie, really important movie that I would say try and seek it out if you can and find it. It's a important story to be told right now. Give that an 8 out of 10. The second to last movie I saw was the documentary The Strike, and this was about hunger strikes by prison inmates who were protesting long-term solitary confinement. Similarly to the last documentary, this was a very intense watch. It was very emotional and disturbing, but very important to see. I think similarly to the other one, also the filmmaking was very simple. They didn't overdo anything, but I think for stories like this, that's important because you want to just tell it how it is. And the reality of laws around solitary confinement are so upsetting that they really need to be talked about more, and I think this movie does a great job of talking about them. The fact that some of these prisoners had spent up to 30 years in solitary confinement is one of the most horrifying things one could even conceive, you know? And I thought the filmmaking was simple, strong, got the point across really well, wasn't too flashy, but told a really, really interesting story, and similarly a very important story that I would recommend people check out. I'll give that one a 7 out of 10. And the film festival closed with a showing of the movie Thelma, which apparently did very well at Sundance, and a lot of people had really liked it, and I 100% see why. This is a movie about a elderly woman who gets scammed out of money and then goes on an adventure to get her money back. And it really is such a well-written movie. That is really what this movie's success comes down to, is how tight of a script it is. Each character had a great arc, and more than just character arcs, there were thematic arcs and arcs with callbacks to the beginnings of the film, and just the way it deconstructed action movie in a comedic way, and the way it was shot, the angle choices, it was all just brilliant. And yeah, I mean, I think maybe my one complaint about the movie would be that sometimes the comedy felt a little bit corny, because it was all like old people jokes, you know, like, oh, we're old. And I don't know, I didn't find that to be the most interesting thing, but for the most part, it made me laugh a lot. I think the performances were all great. The fact that the lead actor in this movie is in her 90s is just so impressive. And yeah, a really nice, touching story that I think a lot of people would enjoy. So definitely check that one out. I'll give it a 9 out of 10. And that's all the movies I watched at the SLO Film Festival. Thanks again to the festival for having me. I had a really good time checking out the movies. I hope to go again next year, and if you want to check it out, check out the film fest, check out these movies, seek out lower budget movies. It's very important. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.